Hi, I know I'm just a cat, but I believe in kindness. If you click subscribe under this video, you'll make my day.
They say you always remember the big moments, your first kiss, the first time someone tells you they love you, the first real paycheck you hold in your hand, or the moment you hear your name echo across a stadium filled with strangers and walk across a stage that was never meant to carry your name. But no one warns you about the moments you wish you could forget but can't, the ones that sit at the back of your throat like a lump that never quite goes away, like scanning a sea of faces on your graduation day and realizing, slowly, and then all at once, that the only people who should have been there, the ones whose names you hesitated to write on every emergency contact form and every thank you card draft, were the ones who didn't show up at all. Not because they couldn't. Not because something tragic had happened. But because they chose not to. I stood in the center of that crowd, in my stiff black gown that smelled like plastic and borrowed success, capped too tight on my head, and I kept telling myself that maybe they were just late, maybe traffic, or a wrong turn, or a forgotten ticket. But when the last row of graduates took their seats and the faculty began their speeches and the sun hit just the right angle to make me squint through my tears, it became excruciatingly clear. There was no one coming. Not my mom with her fake smile and forced Facebook posts. Not my stepdad, who used to slam the bathroom door every time I stayed in the shower for more than 5 minutes because water costs money. Not my grandmother, whose way of saying I love you was asking if I'd gained weight. And definitely not my cousin Lacey, who once promised we'd wear matching dresses and scream our names for each other when the day came. That day had come, and I was screaming on the inside alone. The rest of the ceremony moved in a kind of slow, suffocating blur. People cheered, laughed, sobbed, called out names of their sons, daughters, brothers, and sisters, and each time someone else erupted in applause around me, it felt like a kick to the ribs. I sat like stone, clapping when appropriate, nodding on cue, but something inside me was tightening, not in sadness, but in something sharper, something that burned. Rage, maybe. Vindication. A clarity that had been bubbling beneath my skin for years, finally boiling over. When they called my name first, middle, last, I walked across that stage with steps too calm, hands too steady. I shook the dean's hand. I smiled for the camera. But I didn't keep walking. I turned, right there at the microphone they used to announce degrees and honors, and I asked if I could say something. The faculty member next to me looked startled, unsure, maybe thinking I was about to cry or thank God or list off mentors like everyone else had done. Instead, I gripped the mic, leaned in, and let my voice carry through every last corner of that stadium. This one's for everyone who didn't show up, I said, and I paused, not for effect, but because my throat was dry with the kind of truth that cracks you open. You don't get to claim this success. You didn't help build it. You didn't earn it with me. So don't put my name in your mouths later like you were here, like you cared. This degree? This moment? It belongs to me and no one else. There was a second of absolute silence, the kind of silence that doesn't fall gently but punches the air out of a room, and then, slowly, someone clapped. A few people stood. A scattered cheer. And then it turned into something like applause. But I didn't care. I walked off the stage and straight to the exit. I didn't even pick up the stupid commemorative tassel or the alumni swag bag. When I got back to my tiny apartment, the one I could barely afford while working 2 jobs and studying until my eyes burned, I threw my cap on the floor, stripped off the gown, and sat on the kitchen tile in silence. No one was going to knock on my door. No surprise celebration. No congratulations balloon tied to the mailbox. Just me, a 22-year-old woman who had finally, completely, been abandoned, but in a way that felt strangely like freedom. My phone buzzed. I didn't look at it for a while. When I finally did, I saw 5 missed calls from my mother, 2 from my aunt, and a voicemail that read as if it were glowing red. I played it on speaker. "You've got some nerve," her voice snarled through the static. "You embarrassed this family. You had no right to say what you said. We've been nothing but supportive. If you're too blind to see that, then maybe you don't deserve to be a part of us anymore." I played it again. And again. Then I laughed. A loud, hollow kind of laugh, the kind that fills empty rooms and makes neighbors worry. But it was the second voicemail that made me stop laughing. It was shorter, quieter. My stepdad's voice. I hadn't heard it in over a year. He didn't say hello. He didn't say my name. He just said, "You really think you're untouchable now? You don't know anything." And just like that, the floor didn't feel so solid anymore. Because his voice didn't sound angry. It sounded calm, confident. Like he knew something I didn't. And I hate that I checked the locks twice before bed that night. Because suddenly, I realized the people who don't show up when you're winning are often the same ones who try to crawl back in when they think they're about to lose control. And sometimes, they don't knock. Sometimes, they break in. The thing they never warn you about when you finally cut the last thread connecting you to people who were supposed to love you unconditionally is that the silence that follows, that deep, eerie silence where you expect either closure or collapse, can suddenly be shattered by the very voices you prayed to never hear again, calling not to reconcile, but to reassert control in the most manipulative, emotionally precise ways they know how. I spent the morning after my speech replaying the voicemails, not because I was uncertain or regretting anything, but because there was something unsettling in the shift of tone. As if my public declaration of independence had struck a nerve so raw and so well hidden that they couldn't let it go unpunished. The first voicemail from my mother was laced with a kind of hysteria that I had come to recognize as her fallback defense whenever she was caught doing something she couldn't morally justify. She never apologized, never asked why I said what I said. She simply accused, projected, and rewrote history so fast that if I hadn't kept a journal of every miserable Thanksgiving and every missed birthday call, I might have believed her version over my own. That morning, with sunlight pouring into the kitchen like an unwanted spotlight, I opened Facebook purely out of habit, not because I expected messages of congratulations, but because I wanted to see who would be fake enough to publicly applaud what they privately tried to sabotage. And there it was, clear as day, my mother's status update. So proud of my baby girl graduating today. We may not be perfect, but family is forever. Love you always, sweetheart. My face didn't flush with anger, it froze, the way your hands do when you've left them in ice water for too long and suddenly try to move your fingers. The comments came in droves, old high school friends, church acquaintances, even our former neighbor with the yappy dog that used to bark through the walls. "You must be so proud. She's lucky to have you." Saw her speech, gave me chills. You raised a strong one. Each message was like a needle, and by the end of the scroll, I felt as if I were being sewn into a lie I never consented to. My cousin Lacey messaged me a few hours later. Not to apologize. Not to say she missed me or wished she'd come. Just, "You really made them mad." Dinner was awkward. That was the first time I heard there had even been a dinner, some post-graduation family gathering, complete with champagne and a toast in my honor, which, by the photos I found later, looked suspiciously staged, like a celebration thrown not for me, but for the social media audience they hoped to impress. In the pictures, my mom wore a bright pink blouse she hadn't touched in years, the one she said was only for real milestones, and my stepdad had on his stiff Sunday suit, the one he used for weddings and court dates. They sat around the table smiling, not beaming with pride, but grinning like politicians, rehearsed and hollow, clinking glasses with people I hadn't seen since I was 16. When I ran out of the house barefoot in the middle of a storm because my stepfather had called me a burden loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. They toasted to my bright future and captioned it with "Cheers to family," even though not one of them had so much as sent a text to confirm what time the ceremony started. What cut the deepest wasn't the performative nature of the dinner, but the underlying message it carried, that they were going to rewrite the narrative with or without my permission. I had told my truth in front of hundreds, but they were determined to drown it out in a flood of curated images and half-baked sentiments. I was not invited to that dinner, not even told about it, because my presence was no longer necessary. I had served my role, the troubled kid who turned things around, the black sheep who unexpectedly made it. They wanted to borrow the glory without carrying the shame. They needed me as a symbol, not as a person. That night, unable to sleep and haunted by the ease with which they erased my absence, I did something I hadn't done in nearly 8 years. I dialed my biological father. The man who had disappeared somewhere between my 10th birthday and my high school prom. The man whose name I hadn't spoken aloud since my mother spat it during arguments like a curse. I didn't expect him to pick up. I didn't expect anything, really. But the phone didn't ring more than twice before I heard his voice, slow and wary. "Hey, kiddo." It took me a moment to respond because there was something about the way he said kiddo, like it was a nickname he used all the time, like it hadn't been nearly a decade since we'd last spoken, that made me feel 12 again and furious. I skipped the pleasantries. I asked him straight out if he knew I had graduated. He paused, then said, "I saw something online. Your mom posted pictures. Looked like a nice family thing." I wanted to laugh, to scream, to explain that none of it was real. But instead, I asked him something I had buried for years. I asked if he ever got the letter I sent when I was 15, the one where I begged him to take me in, to let me live with him instead of enduring the daily emotional whiplash of my mother's moods and my stepfather's cold indifference. He went silent. I thought the line had disconnected. Then, in a voice that sounded nothing like the one I remembered, he whispered, "What letter?" That was the moment everything shifted again. Because that letter wasn't something I imagined, and I knew I had mailed it, sealed it with trembling hands, and sent it to the address my aunt swore was still his. If he never got it, then someone had intercepted it. And there was only one person I knew with both the motive and the access. My stepdad. And if he had taken that letter, if he had hidden it, if he had chosen to make sure I stayed in that house, not out of love, not out of responsibility, but out of some twisted sense of control, then everything I thought I understood about those years, everything I thought I had survived, might have just been the surface of something much darker. I ended the call with a polite lie, "I'll talk to you soon," and then stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, my mind spinning not with pain, but with something colder. Because suddenly, this wasn't about closure anymore. This was about proof. And I had a feeling the truth was buried somewhere deeper than I dared dig before. It's a strange and disorienting thing to realize that, for years, you've been living your life as if you were the unreliable narrator of your own story, questioning memories, doubting instincts, and wondering if perhaps you really were too sensitive, too dramatic, too incapable of letting things go only to stumble upon cold, undeniable proof that the people you thought were simply flawed had in fact been working, quietly and methodically, to control and erase you from the very spaces you once believed you belonged in. After that call with my father, that unsettling conversation where he insisted he never received the letter I had poured my soul into at 15, I spent hours pacing my apartment, retracing every step of the memory like I was walking through a crime scene, trying to pinpoint when exactly the version of events I clung to had been manipulated without my knowledge. I remembered the envelope, white, slightly crumpled from being tucked into my school bag all day, and I remembered the postage, the stamp with the faded American flag, the pen I used to write his name in shaky block letters. I even remembered the way my hand trembled when I dropped it into the mailbox, my chest filled with equal parts hope and desperation, because in that moment, I truly believed that reaching out to my father might change the trajectory of my life. But he never got it, and I never got an answer, and so I convinced myself he didn't care, that he had moved on with his new family and a new daughter who didn't cry at night or get in trouble at school or come home with bruises she refused to explain. And the idea that someone, most likely my stepdad, had stolen that chance from me wasn't just infuriating, it was terrifying, because it meant that I had been maneuvered like a pawn in a game I didn't even know was being played. I didn't want to go back to the house. I had promised myself I never would, that once I got out, once I had my degree and a job and a place to sleep that didn't reek of bitterness and bleach, I would never again walk through that front door. But something about the way they had rewritten my graduation, staging a dinner, making posts, spinning narratives that painted them as proud, present parents, made me realize that if I didn't confront the ghosts directly, they would keep dancing around the truth, wrapping it in lace and lies until even I couldn't tell what was real anymore. So I called Lacey. She was the only one who might still give me something resembling honesty, even if it came soaked in passive aggression. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Did you go to the dinner?" She hesitated, then sighed, like she knew the question was a trap, but didn't want to admit she'd already fallen into it. Yeah, I didn't know you weren't invited until we were already there. Your mom said you were doing your own thing, wanted space. She made it sound like you'd asked for that. I wanted to scream. Instead, I asked, was he there? You mean your stepdad? Her voice dropped. Yeah, he gave a toast. A toast to what? To your resilience, she said, and I could practically hear her cringe. He said, and I quote, even though she's been distant lately, we're so proud of the strong woman she's become. Then he made some joke about how you always had your head in the clouds. I hung up before I could say something unforgivable. The next morning, I drove past the neighborhood I once called home, every street corner flashing old memories, some blurred by time, others painfully vivid, and pulled into the driveway that still had the same cracks in the pavement and the rusted mailbox I once shoved that letter into. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't knock. I used the spare key my grandmother gave me years ago, the one I kept on my keyring like a relic from a life I wasn't ready to bury. The house smelled exactly the same, lemon cleaner mixed with something stale and damp, and I could feel the tension in the air before I even crossed the threshold. No one was home, or at least I hope not. I moved quickly, instinct guiding me to the hallway closet where my stepfather used to store important documents in a weathered gray filing cabinet that never locked properly. My hands were shaking, but my focus was razor-sharp, and within minutes I was sifting through folders marked taxes, mortgage, CR loan, until I found one labeled simply Maddie. My name, scrawled in his ugly, blocky handwriting. Inside were report cards, disciplinary notices, hospital bills I didn't even know existed, and, tucked between a folded dental receipt and an envelope marked "Do Not Discard," I found my letter. The one to my father. Still sealed. Unsent. Untouched. My breath caught in my throat. I opened it slowly, hands numb, reading my own teenage desperation like it was a letter from someone else entirely, someone smaller, softer, more hopeful. The final line crushed me. Please, I don't want to feel like I'm disappearing anymore. I don't remember leaving. I don't remember locking the door or driving home, or changing out of the jeans that were now damp from the rain that had started somewhere along the way. I just remember sitting on the floor of my apartment again, surrounded by the remnants of a childhood I thought I had escaped, but had clearly never finished unpacking. I wanted revenge, not the violent, dramatic kind, but something smarter. Something exact. So I took pictures. Of the letter. Of the folder. Of every document in that drawer. I made digital copies, backed them up twice, sent them to an email account I created just for this purpose. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with them yet, but I knew this much. If they wanted to rewrite my story, they were going to have to contend with the original version first. And as I sat there, staring at the letter that never left the house, I realized something that sent a chill through me far colder than any rainstorm ever could. If they hid this, what else had they buried? Because now I was beginning to wonder whether the erasure of my presence from that family wasn't just emotional neglect or petty bitterness, but a deliberate strategy, one designed to silence me completely. And I had just found the first piece of evidence. There's a moment, after you uncover something you weren't meant to find, when the adrenaline that carried you through the discovery begins to wear off, and what settles in its place isn't pride or empowerment or even fear, it's a kind of exhausted clarity. The understanding that what you've been battling your entire life wasn't just emotional distance or garden variety dysfunction, but a system, a quiet and well-maintained structure built over years by people who counted on you being too busy, too tired, or too ashamed to dig deep enough to expose the foundation. I thought the letter was the bottom, that I had uncovered the worst of it, but people like my stepfather don't operate with just one contingency. They bury everything twice, and just when you think you've reached the end of the maze, you realize it was only the foyer, and the real secrets are housed in rooms you didn't even know existed. 2 weeks after I found the letter, 2 weeks spent alternating between numb stillness and feverish paranoia, my phone buzzed with a notification from my cousin Lacey, the one who always hovered somewhere between loyal and complicit, depending on how close she needed to remain to the family's good graces. She didn't call, just sent a text with no greeting. Did you hear about Grandma? My stomach dropped, not because I didn't expect the news, but because I did. My grandmother had been declining for months, maybe years, and while I wasn't kept in the loop by choice, whispers reached me through reluctant sources. Her memory was fading, her knees were giving out. She no longer remembered which holidays belonged to which season. But death, no matter how expected, still arrives with the gravity of finality, and in that moment, staring at Lacey's message, I felt a strange mix of emotions that didn't line up neatly, not grief, not guilt, but something more like being unmoored. As if the last symbolic tie to my family had been severed and no one had bothered to tell me until it was already done. The funeral was small, conservative, and, in the pictures I later saw, impeccably staged. My mother wore black lace and pearls, clinging to a tissue like she'd just finished performing in a community theater tragedy, and my stepfather stood beside her like a statue carved from condescension, his hand resting on her shoulder with just enough pressure to remind everyone who the real head of the household had been. I wasn't invited. I wasn't even mentioned. Lacey sent me a photo of the program, and my name was nowhere in it. No granddaughter section. No acknowledgement. Nothing. But what truly snapped something inside me wasn't the exclusion from the service. I had already prepared for that possibility. It was what came next, when Lacey, this time with an uncharacteristic flicker of something close to guilt, told me about the will. "They left everything to your mom," she said flatly. "The house, the savings, the jewelry, everything." I asked the obvious question, the one that practically screamed from my throat. Why? Lacey paused, long enough that I thought she might not answer at all, then finally said, "Your mom said it was Grandma's decision. That she cut you out because of the distance, the whole graduation thing." It didn't add up. My grandmother, for all her biting comments and frosty detachment, had been the only one who remembered to send me cards on my birthday, the only one who once pulled me aside when I was 16 and whispered, "You're not crazy, you know. They just hate things they can't control." It was a rare moment of softness in a relationship that was mostly comprised of passive critiques and outdated recipes, but I never forgot it, and I didn't believe for one second that she would cut me out of the will unless someone pushed her, or worse, spoke on her behalf when she was no longer lucid enough to defend herself. 2 days later, I received a call from a woman named Lorraine, who introduced herself as my grandmother's old neighbor from the church volunteer group. The same Lorraine who used to bring over pies that tasted like dust, but were always served with warmth and unsolicited advice about dating. Her voice was tight, guarded, but there was something urgent behind it. "I think I have something you should see," she said. "Your grandmother left it with me months ago, told me not to give it to anyone but you." She didn't offer more, just gave me an address and a time, and when I arrived, she opened the door in a faded cardigan and invited me in without ceremony. Her house was cluttered in the way elderly homes often are, every surface telling a story, every photo frame slightly crooked. She handed me a small manila envelope, sealed with tape, and said only, "She wanted you to know the truth." Inside was a letter, handwritten in careful cursive, my grandmother's unmistakable scrawl. She started with small talk, her usual formalities, how she hoped I was eating well, that she was proud of my graduation even if she couldn't attend, and then, as if slowly peeling off layers of armor, she began to explain. She had wanted to leave me the silver bracelet her mother had given her, the one with the tiny blue stones that matched my eyes, and she had set aside a portion of her savings for me, not a fortune, but enough to help with rent or maybe a used car. But when she tried to finalize the documents, my mother and stepfather insisted she was confused, that I didn't need it, that I had made it clear I was done with the family. She said she had signed what they gave her without reading, and later realized they had erased me from every page. "I'm sorry," she wrote, her script trembling in the final lines. "I wasn't strong enough to fight them. But I never stopped thinking about you." Tucked behind the letter was a small USB drive, no label, no note. Lorraine said she didn't know what was on it, only that my grandmother had asked her to keep it safe. I drove home in silence, my hands clenched around the wheel, my thoughts spinning faster than I could contain them. I plugged the drive into my laptop with a hesitation that bordered on dread, not because I feared what I might find, but because I was terrified it might confirm everything I already suspected. And it did. The folders were dated, some going back years. Scans of legal documents, emails printed and annotated in red ink, photos of family gatherings I hadn't been invited to, one even from my high school graduation, where my mother posed beside Lacey holding flowers meant for me. And then, the final file, an audio recording labeled only record_3. I pressed play, and for the next 6 minutes I sat frozen as my mother's voice, clear and unmistakably cruel, explained to someone, maybe a lawyer, maybe a friend, how she had streamlined the inheritance to avoid drama and reward the people who were actually present. She always played the victim, she said, her tone clipped and businesslike. But if you give someone like that money, they'll never stop blaming you when it runs out. She laughed. And in that moment, something inside me went very still. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just listened. Twice. Then a third time. And by the end, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Not out of spite. Not out of revenge. But because truth, when documented, has power. And I was finally holding the match. There's a quiet kind of fury that settles in when you realize that everything you've been through, every insult you swallowed, every moment you doubted your own memory, every time you blamed yourself for being too emotional or too ungrateful, wasn't just unfortunate family miscommunication or the result of clashing personalities, but the orchestrated erasure of your presence by people who were so determined to control the narrative that they rewrote you out of your own life as if you were an inconvenient character in a story they believed they had the right to edit. Sitting in front of my laptop, staring at the audio file I had now played a fourth time, I felt something in me rearrange itself, like my bones were settling into a new alignment, not built from trauma or desperation, but from a kind of brutal resolve that doesn't come from wanting revenge, but from knowing that telling the truth is the only weapon you'll ever need when the people around you have spent years mastering the art of the lie. I didn't move for a long time, letting the weight of it all press down on me until it began to feel familiar. The sound of my mother's voice, cold, calculated, dismissive, had always been the soundtrack of my childhood, woven into my internal monologue like a metronome of inadequacy, and now, hearing it so plainly, so undeniably exposed, felt like dragging a phantom into daylight and realizing it wasn't a monster, just a small, bitter woman afraid of losing control. My first instinct, honest as it was impulsive, was to post the file, to let the world hear what I had heard, to lift the curtain and show the audience that the actors they applauded were frauds reading from a script they wrote themselves, but something held me back. It wasn't fear. It was strategy. Because I didn't want to shout the truth into the void and hope it echoed. I wanted it delivered, precisely, directly, into the hands of the very people who had tried so hard to silence me. So I began compiling everything, the scanned documents, the annotated photos, the recordings, the letter from my grandmother, even the original copy of my unsent plea to my father, all carefully organized into digital folders, backed up and encrypted, every piece labeled not out of obsession, but because I knew that this time there could be no denying it, no brushing it off as drama or another one of Maddie's overreactions. This was evidence. This was testimony. This was history, unfiltered and untwisted. I created a private website, something simple, untraceable, password protected, with only one page per person. My mother, my stepfather, Lacey, my aunt, even the family friends who had parroted lies without blinking. Each page contained only the files relevant to them, no commentary, no accusations, just their own words and actions, reflected back like a mirror held too close. I wrote no introductions, no explanations, just a single line at the top of every page in bold. This is what you did. Then I sent them. Not all at once, not in a dramatic group blast, but individually, personalized emails from a separate account, each titled with their first name and nothing else. I didn't wait for replies. I didn't need them. I didn't want performative apologies or gaslit half-confessions. I wanted silence. I wanted the heavy, Squirming stillness that comes when someone realizes they can no longer control the version of the story being told, when they understand that their actions, once confined to whispered rooms and closed-door conversations, now live outside their grasp, permanent and undeniable. The first response came within the hour from Lacey of all people. Not an apology, but a question. Did you send this to anyone else? I didn't answer. Her second message, a minute later, please don't post this. I had no idea it was this bad. But she did. They all did. They just didn't think I'd remember. Or that I'd ever have the means or the nerve to collect proof. My mother didn't reply. Not that day. Not the next. But I saw the read receipt. She had opened the email. She had clicked the link. And then, 2 days later, I got a single text message, no punctuation, no greeting. You've always been ungrateful. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Because in the end, she wasn't really angry about what I'd shared. She was angry that I had finally taken control of the story and written her out of the ending. I could have ended it there. I could have left the website online, let it collect digital dust as a quiet archive of truth. But I wanted one final note, not a confrontation, but a conclusion. So I returned to the beginning, to the stage, to the moment when everything changed. I reached out to the university and asked if I could make a short speech at the upcoming alumni mixer, citing my desire to speak to recent graduates about navigating personal adversity. They agreed, perhaps out of politeness, perhaps out of curiosity. Either way, I was handed the mic once more, standing in front of a smaller crowd this time, fewer gowns, more cocktail dresses, less pomp and more murmured conversation. I cleared my throat, looked out at the polite, expectant faces, and said, when I graduated here a few weeks ago, I made a speech. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. But it was real. I said that my success didn't belong to the people who didn't show up, and that still stands. But what I didn't say then, what I didn't realize until after, is that sometimes the people who don't show up do more damage than the ones who actively try to tear you down. Because they abandon you in the subtle, daily ways, in how they rewrite the story, in how they talk about you like you're a failure before you've even started, in how they take credit for things they didn't build and deny the harm they did behind closed doors. The room was quiet. I could feel the air shift, that slight tension when people aren't sure whether to applaud or absorb. I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I had never felt more certain of my place. So, if you're one of those people, someone who made it here without a cheering section, without a safety net, without the illusion of unconditional support, I want you to know something. You don't need their approval. You never did. And the best part about telling your own story is that they don't get to edit the ending. And I walked off the stage, not to applause, not to tears, but to something better, stillness. The kind that settles after a storm, when the air is finally clear and the damage is no longer theoretical. That night, as I sat on my balcony, the sky overcast but peaceful, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen, then answered without speaking. A young woman's voice, soft but steady, came through the speaker. "You don't know me," she said, "but I think I'm your sister." And in the space between the words, between everything I had uncovered and everything still hidden, I felt the quiet pull of a new beginning, not born out of vengeance or victory, but out of something far rarer, the hope that maybe, just maybe, this story wasn't over yet.